Okay, I've got all the labels attached to the device, and so now I'm just going to run through the order of assembly really quick for version 2, and then I'm going to just demonstrate setting a couple of the trim pots. So first thing you're going to do with this version is you're going to install the I/O board. That's going to drop in here and just slide up through those holes. Now, one thing to be careful of when you're doing this is you want to keep a finger against these when you're putting in the screws, but keep your hands off these gold-plated pins that mate with the output board. You don't want to accidentally bend those and you get them dirty. So this area right here is free of any of the pins, so that's a handy place to, across these 3 mono jacks, handy place to just put a finger when you're holding this in place. And these aren't the screws. I haven't ordered the 2mm button head screws that I'm going to use for this yet, but these ones are just some other 2mm screws which I can use as placeholders for now. There are 4 screw holes here which were drilled, which were part of the template, but one of the screw holes is underneath this mad squared sticker, and I tested, and I don't think the 4th hole is not far from the 3rd, and I think 3 of them is plenty of support from, you know, I screwed this in before and just tested putting jacks in and out, and it seemed to be fine, so I'm going to just not use that 4th hole. Okay, after that, you're going to drop in the main board with the output board attached. Now you can see I'm not going to show attaching that output board. I've done that in other videos. This output board on top is very easy. It just plops in, and there's 7 screws that hold that in place that are very easy to install now that I'm using these soldered in spacers that are threaded. Once this board was dropped in, I inserted, I plugged in these 2 connectors here, and I ran the one connector that's the MIDI connector around to there. So that hooks up the main board. Okay, a couple things to note before I pop in this main board is that, first of all, these little 4 mini black toggle switches are socketed, meaning you can pop them out and put them back in again. Also means it's very easy to replace them if one of them breaks, or you can change the color. These 3 are amber, but if you prefer red or green on one or more of them, you can buy replacement switches and pop them in. You should note that they are polarized, and they only go in correctly one way for operation. So there's print on one side, no print on the other, and on my design, all of the sides that have no print are facing the back of the board, and the side with print is facing up. Make sure you keep them polarized correctly. The reason I socketed them was I wanted them raised up. Otherwise, they're quite low when they come through here to flip. And by socketing them, I can raise them up to close to the limit of the aluminum on the inside of the lid. But they have a little collar on them that goes through the hole, assuming you drill the hole in the right spot. And that collar keeps them from falling out when you flip them back and forth, from pulling out of the socket. So just make sure, I'm making sure before I insert this that they are all seated fully all the way down. And then I'm going to also attach the 3 yellow connectors which go from the output board to some of the other boards, and those will be marked with little letters like this one, showing that one is for the rhythm board. That one will go on this side. The one that goes to the sub-os board is this one. You'll notice I put these in. I don't push on the wires to mate them. I put my fingernail along the edge that does not, I'm not touching the wire when I click them into place. Trying to always keep the strain off these connectors. You want to bend those down. They'll be sliding down. And this last one is the one that goes to the interconnect board, the long one. And that won't be bending down here. I don't need to plug that in yet. Now with my rocker switches of the Monotribe pointing straight up and my dust covers back on and in place, I'm going to use that little interconnect board as a handle. And by the way, I tested all of this. I tested that this drops straight into the holes that I drilled before I ever, am attempting to mate it with this jack board. So now I want to come slowly straight down till I'm to the point where I believe I should mate. And I believe I just did. Everything's sitting flat. Now, basically this will have to be removed to get, it doesn't have to be removed to pull either of these two sideboards in and out, but it does have to be removed to get the front board in and out. So I think what I'll do right now is so you want to take, this is the sub-os board, you got the wire coming out of the output board there. You want to get that inserted and clicked into place. And then you're just going to bend those wires a little bit. We want to get that yellow thing through the little gap there. I don't know if you can see that in the vid. I made sure as I'm pushing that through to get the wire through the gap of there. All right, we'll do the rhythm board. Same deal. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. The leads on this one pot on the main board was something they're quite long. Korg left them uncut. And the wire from the main board starts to catch on those when you're trying to install it, and it could, pull out or tear one of those wires. So you can cut those leads down as tight as possible. Bend those wires up a little. Remember, this is the first time. Once you've done this a couple times, take it apart, it's easier because the wires are kind of bent in the right way that they need to be bent to go in and out smoothly. Now, make sure this fits. You see the clearance. If when you drill these holes for either of the sideboards and you accidentally get a little too far this way, you can see that there's on the first prototype I made, I drilled the holes a little too far to the this side, and I was actually this board was nicking it here, but you can easily sand, there's, you know, a good millimeter of gap before and then it's all ground plane. You could take out a big chunk of this board. There's a trace there, so you have less room here, but even here you have 3 millimeters you could take off if you needed to. Right now it is absolutely correct. It just drops right in as it should, like that. So we can attach this cable. I know there's another cable here for the battery and speaker, but I'm going to attach that. I made a longer cable for this, which is needed with the additions. I'm going to attach that later, which is easy enough to do even with this in place. Okay, we're going to pop out this so that we can get in the VCO board. As I mentioned before in another video, it's easy to pop these out by working on the tabs. Get a fingernail on one side, pull up. I just pop it out, slide it underneath. These two, the two posts have to be out as well. So I didn't have them very tight to get in this board. One thing you have to remember is the connection between the VCO sends its signal, it's all its output to the sub-os board, which brings it up to the output board. You're going to have to attach this. I'm going to put that on there first. I'm going to bend this out a ways here. You still got the screw sticking up you have to be cautious about, but if you kind of bring it in, okay. Now, last thing to do before we put that back in is we need to get this connected. One thing to keep in mind here is that there is a thick plastic post that has to drop down in this gap. So whatever you do with excess wire, it has to stay out of the way of that post. I will, deliver these connectors with the kit, but I'm not precise when I make these things, so it may be that, like this one, is a little bit longer than it needs to be. It could have been shorter. So I do have to think about what I'm trying to do is I'm going to try to bend the wire up that way instead of it going that way. But first, I need to get it in there and connected, which takes a little bit of finagling. Okay, it's in there, and you see right now it's blocking that post. But if I bring this out, I'm going to want to have this wire kind of coming up and out a bit. Seems to be good. It's solid. You don't want to crimp that wire underneath the post. That's the main thing. All right, that's basically where it needs to go, and I'll just be cautious about this corner when you're, screwing together the plastic case. You don't want to crimp that wire in there. You got room to come up, out of the way. You just can't get in the way of that screw hole, and you don't want to crimp it. First thing I need to is put the post back in. All right. You'll notice on the interconnect board, all of the connectors are put so that the front edge is aligned with the board, except the one that goes to the oscillator board. And that's because it's so tight in here. If I had that up near the front, you'd have a problem with the wires catching on things or getting in the way. So anyway, before you drop this board back in, better to have the black connector already in place, the one which is going to go to here, because the other ones are easy to get in and out even when the board's in place, but this one's a little trickier. It's still possible, but I basically take this in and out with that connector always attached there, so I remember. Okay, I'm going to drop in the interconnect board. I'm going to bend these out of the way a little bit. When I do that, get them above it. Get easier to guide them in. Okay. That's in place. Now we've just got a bunch of connectors to plug in. I'll start with this one. Okay, I've got all the connectors done except the last two are for the drum board, the rhythm board. So all the boards are installed and all the cables connected, and the last thing to do before closing it up, there's one cable missing, the cable to the battery compartment, but that last cable on the bottom, the one thing to do before that is to adjust the tracking. There's a little trim pot right here, so you need a little screwdriver. Like I've mentioned several times already, this can run without the back on, but you would need to use headsets. So what I normally do is I'm plugging that headset into the output, the headphone jack, which is here on the Monotribe, and then I'm plugging the power in, and while I hold the case like this, I can put one finger against a key to hold it in. I can just listen to that key while I'm tuning. Now, the way you want to have this set is you want all the knobs, the selector switches, straight up except for the range of the keyboard. You want that on key so that it's only playing key tones. And you want, no LFO, obviously. I'm using triangle wave, VCF almost all the way up, about 3/4 of the way, peak all the way down. You've got to have VCO2. You've got to make sure the sync is completely off. You've got to have the range set to regular, the up setting, and you need to switch up CV in from VCO1. So we want to track the CV from VCO1, so we got to send that into VCO2. So that's set correctly. And then what I do is I work from C right here. I'm holding the case like this, got this on sustain, so I'm keeping my finger just pressed on C, right? While I do that, I can hold it, I can turn it around. I'm hearing the C right now through the headphones as I keep it there. Also, I can flip through the octaves while I'm listening. What you want to do when you're adjusting the tracking is concentrate on from the very top, which is 2, 4, 8, 16, and 32. You're not going to go to 64 because the tracking isn't going to go that low, but you're going to deal with these, trying to get it basically in tune with VCO1 across those 5 switch places. So start up at 2, the highest, press middle C, and then tune VCO2 here to match, to be in tune with it. I've got it in tune right now, and then as you start to hold it in and rotate this, go 5 switches down, and then start to adjust this until you're getting this lower setting in tune. Then you're going to go back up here, and maybe this is drifted out of tune slightly, retune it, come back down again, and it's just this process of going back and forth until you're getting to the point where it's almost in tune at every step, maybe with a little bit of beating in between, and that's about as close as you're going to get it. It'll sound, let me show you on prototype 1. You can hear it, that's beating slightly, a little bit beating. It's hard to get it precise, but you can basically get it working across those 5 settings. If you go to the lowest setting, the device is tracking from about, I think, C, D, E, F, about G here. From G to the top there. So you're missing that last bit on the lowest setting. And that's octave is good. That octave is good. That octave is good. That octave is good. See, it goes out there. On the highest setting, you're good up to about D, D sharp. That's about the limit of the VCO2. So you're missing that range on the highest setting and this range on the lowest setting. After that's done, you can close it up. There's one last little mod that's done here. That's just putting a wire tie underneath that board like that. Basically, it's going to just hold this wire because it's so tight in this range. That connector, the battery board, is coming down right around here, and this area is tight, so this is just a way to, you can see I have that, the wire tie isn't all the way tightened, it's just tightened in, it's just fixed in a kind of loop that can be moved around, and you can just, I put the wire, the battery wire, the new battery wire, it's a longer one now, through there. Push that down. You see that that wire tie keeps the wire in that general position coming over here and around. Otherwise, you're going to have problems with this interconnect board. The interconnect board is built just above this battery pack here. The dip switch is in this area at the end of the battery pack between the battery pack and the speaker. The dip switch lands. So this raised area is just in there, and then this whole area there is pretty tight to the battery thing, so you'll have problems if you try to run the wires directly over this. So this little wire tie keeps the wire out of the way. That is the assembly. Now the last thing I wanted to demonstrate was setting the range of the CV out, and this is something you can do. You can change any time, which is why there's a little hole here to access the trim pot from the top. Probably you're going to want to set it once and you're never going to think about it again, but it can be that for some special piece of music or something, you decide that it's helpful to change that. And again, the reason we're doing this is because we got 0 to 5 volts out at 1 volt an octave. but the Monotribe has 6.5 octave range. So do you want that 0 to 5 to be up at the top end of the range? Do you want it to be at the bottom end of the range? Do you want it to be smack dab in the middle? One thing to remember, I've mentioned this elsewhere in other videos, that the output amps, the op amps used inside the unit can't go exactly from 0 to 5. They're rail to rail, but they don't go all the way to 0. They go down to 0.2 volts or something. They don't go all the way to 5. They maybe go to 4.8 or 4.9. So you don't get exactly 0 to 5, but you get very close to a 5 octave swing. But because it doesn't go all the way to 0, all the way to 5, don't try to set 0 or 5 volt. Instead, set 1, 2, 3, or 4 volt. Set where that is going to be, because that you'll get a nice perfect number. So, for example, I'll say F is going to be my round voltage number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so that I lose basically about the same amount on the upper and lower end. If this was 5, it would go 4 volts, 3 volts, 2 volts, 1 volt, and 0 volts would be there, but in fact 0, they won't go any lower than about there. So we'll lose about that on the lower end and about that on the upper end. So I will set, let's say, on range 2, an F. Now I've got this set to sustain, so when I press it, it'll sustain the note. I'm going to set it to be 4 volts on the 4 octave setting. That'll be 4 volts. So what I've done is I've taken, I'm taking the CV out from the output board, and I'm, just using a mono mini jack cable. I've got, I'm taking the tip. The tip is positive voltage. The shield is ground. I've got just 2 alligator clips running over to the probe negative side and positive side. I've got the voltage turned on to DC voltage. Now I'm doing this in camera, so it's a little bit hard. I'm seeing it mirrored. But if I press that and hold it, actually I'll just use a, I can see my voltage out, and I'm just going to turn this till I land. Don't worry about a little fluctuation. A little fluctuation at a 1 volt per octave setting is not a big deal. So anyway, again, you can change this anytime you want. Don't worry about it if it's not getting exactly locked. In the end, it's not extremely important. It's more about the range that's covered from this unit. The other unit can be tuned any way you want to the 1 volt per octave. That's it. That's the end of the last video of modifying and setting up this kit.